Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone. Did you know that every 3 minutes, a defenseless animal is killed by a trophy hunter? If you're a fan of our show, you'll know that last year we featured filmmakers Lynn, Santer and James Ganiere to discuss their award-winning film, Land of the Free in the Shadows, which exposes the horrors and monstrosity of the so-called sport of trophy hunting of endangered species. Today's guest is the world's foremost expert, author, and advocate in the battle to ban this barbaric recreational activity engaged in by the super rich. In 2018, he established an organization called the Campaign to Ban Trophy Hunting. He rapidly made trophy hunting the biggest animal welfare and conservation issue in Britain. His investigations have exposed how some of the world's most endangered species are being cruelly killed by the thousands simply for fun. Our guest has brought together politicians, the media, public figures, the business community, and the general public in support of a ban on trophy imports into the UK. And now he's leading an international campaign to abolish trophy hunting and ban trophy imports across the world. He's written many books, including Trophy Hunters Exposed, Inside the Big Game Industry, Killing Game, The Extinction Industry, Trophy Leaks, Trophy Hunters and Industry Secrets Revealed, and Undercover Trophy Hunter, Britain's top 20 hunters revealed. He's a renowned conservationist, and he coordinated the World Wildlife Federation's One Planet Living initiative, which developed the first global footprint calculator for consumers. I'm extremely honored to welcome Mr. Eduardo Goncalves to our show. Eduardo, thank you so much for being here.
Well, Harvey, thank you very much for inviting me and for that very generous introduction there.
Eduardo, you're no stranger to the world of conservation. You've been heavily involved in climate change advocacy. And I know that before you created the campaign to ban trophy hunting, you created an organization called SOS Lynx to stop the extinction of the Iberian lynx, which was the world's most endangered feline. Tell us about the success you've had with saving that species from extinction.
Gosh, well, yes, this was about 20 years ago when I almost by accident discovered the existence of this species, the Iberian lynx. And it is Western Europe's only endemic big cat. And yet it was also the world's most endangered feline species. And the population declines were absolutely cataclysmic. So it had gone from the beginning of the 20th century to there being approximately 100,000 of these animals across the entire Iberian Peninsula, so both Spain and Portugal, to 100 years later, at the beginning of this century, there was fewer than 100 animals left, of which there were only about 28 breeding age females. And there were a number of problems. It had been, trapped and hunted as vermin over the years. There was a destruction of its habitats, largely to build new roads, which was dividing up populations. And there was the apocalyptic situation when the rabbits developed both myxomatosis and then hemorrhagic viral disease. So the Iberian lynx feeds almost exclusively on the European wild rabbit. And so with the disappearance of the rabbits, it literally didn't have anything to eat. And populations was, it was literally on its very last legs. And the big problem actually was that there'd been absolute inertia in terms of trying to put solutions into practice. So on the one hand, on conservation grounds, you had money being pumped in supposedly to conserve its remaining habitats. Yes, at the same time, there was a lot of public money going in to destroy them. For example, building new dams, building new motorways, etc., in exactly the same places. In fact, I remember doing a story with a British newspaper, and we literally did a map where we superimposed where the areas were being conserved for the lynx and where the habitats of lynx were being destroyed simultaneously. So we're paying doubly to push this species to the very brink. And even worse than that was the political inertia. So there was all these disagreements between the different local and national and regional authorities, parks authorities, scientists, and so nothing was done. And for example, there was a breeding center in the middle of the Doñana National Park, the famous Doñana National Park in southwest Spain, which had one of the two remaining populations left. And they had this breeding center, but they had no lynxes. And they'd been like that for a decade. Well, in fact, they did get an elderly female lynx that somebody had been keeping as a pet. And literally, they put in a big bird cage and left outside their door one morning. And this poor elderly animal, Morena, she was called, was there on her own for a long time. And but they literally didn't have, the scientists didn't have permission to go and get other animals from the wild in order to start a breeding program. And there was this extraordinary episode one time when female lynxes, when they get into season, when they go into heat, they make a lot of noise, to let the males know that they're ready, that their time has come, because they only are on heat for a very small period of time during the year, about 3 or 5 days. And so a passing male lynx happened to hear Morena in season, and he somehow got over the 10-meter fence around her enclosure to get in there. The scientists, they were thinking, oh my goodness, what do we do now? I mean, can we trap it? Can we get sperm out of it, freeze it? They were ringing around all the different political offices trying to get guidance on what they were allowed to do, what they weren't allowed to do. In the end, they were told to release that male lynx because he didn't have a permit to be there. And so, this was the situation was just getting worse and worse by the day. Eventually, and this was largely really by bringing the issue out into the public's attention, writing about it in international newspapers, we managed to persuade the authorities, firstly, to start the captive breeding program. So what normally happens in the wild is that a female lynx will give birth to, let's say, 3 cubs, but probably only 1 or 2 will survive. There's a runt of the litter that's unlikely to survive in the wild, because largely there's not enough rabbits for the female lynx, the mother, to feed herself and therefore create milk. And so anyway, finally they got permission to go out and find runts that wouldn't normally survive in the wild, and they started bringing them in. The first one was Saliega, then there was Aura, and gradually the population grew. Anyway, now there's about half a dozen of these breeding centers in both Spain and Portugal, and they're swapping the animals, so they're making the most of the narrow gene base that's available, and hundreds have been returned back into the wild. So now it's not out of the woods yet, but I think it's now a lot less likely that the species will get extinct. I mean, the real problem there, though, was not so much the conservation as the politics. And I think, unfortunately, that's something that you find in many, many fields.
Yes, absolutely. You were also instrumental in the battle to ban fox hunting and dog fighting in the UK, weren't you?
Well, I was the CEO of the League Against Cruel Sports, which is the main anti-fox hunting organisation in Britain, and it was in fact the organisation that got the government to bring in a ban on chasing foxes with packs of hounds. But there'd been successive attempts by certain people, largely within the Conservative Party, who had been trying to repeal that law because they felt that it was an infringement on their rights, and so there was various attempts by the government. And indeed, when there was the 2017 general election in Britain, one of the very first things that the Prime Minister, Theresa May, said that if you re-elect me and my government, I will bring the bill back to Parliament so that we can have a vote to repeal it, which of course was pretty shocking. The ban had been in place for about 15 years then, 12 years, and of course the vast majority of the public are dead against it. And yet this was an attempt to reach out to some wealthy people who they wanted as donors, or they wanted to keep on board as donors, and so on. And also we did an opinion poll, actually, where we went to marginal constituencies, so where the sitting Conservative MP had a small majority. And we wanted to ask people who identified as Conservative voters, would they actually switch their vote if their local candidate was in favour of bringing back fox hunting? Now, the response was quite extraordinary. Something like 16% of Conservative voters said they would hold their nose, and vote for an opposition party because that was how strongly they felt about it. Well, I then wrote to all the Conservative Party chairmen in marginal constituencies around the country. And what we saw over the next few days was this quite extraordinary Damascene conversion, it seemed, by a number of their candidates saying, no, absolutely, I support the ban, I want to keep it there. If it came to Parliament, I'd absolutely not change the law, and so on. And indeed, a few months later, the government announced that it was never going to try this again. And so that was a relief, because that was a really important milestone, I think, in British animal welfare legislation. In terms of dog fighting, I mean, this is something that has been supposedly illegal for some time. in Britain for, well, getting on for a couple of hundred years, in fact. But there are crime syndicates, there are criminal gangs who are still doing this. And so we actually discovered that, there were groups who were, breeding dogs, they were trading them, they were organizing fights, and, there was prize money of $50,000. And this is quite extraordinary. And of course, some of these people were involved in some other very serious criminal activities as well, such as, people trafficking, gun smuggling, high class drugs, etc., etc. And so we conducted an undercover investigation where we literally infiltrated Europe's largest criminal syndicate involved in dogfighting, and we got a lot of secret footage, and we exposed this both to the politicians so that they could see that this was happening. And part of the reason this was happening was because the penalties were almost worthless. I mean, you could go to jail for longer for dumping rubbish, trash in the streets than you would for being involved in a heinous crime like dogfighting. And anyway, so we managed to bust this gang up and break up all of their criminal activities. And the story was very widely told on the media. And, and I went to the government and said, look, this is why you need to up sentences for animal cruelty. And the minister agreed. And now we do have a bill going through where if you are involved in this type of criminal activity, you could face 5 years in jail. And probably some people say that's not enough, but hey, 5 years is a lot better than it was before.
Oh, absolutely. I want our viewers to know that you co-wrote a book entitled The Fox, the Hound, and the Human, which exposed the practice of illegal fox hunting in Britain, causing up to 10,000 fox cubs and 3,000 hounds to be killed every year in the UK. Congratulations, Eduardo. I'm so proud of you for leading that battle.
Well, thank you. I mean, it is something that I think really shocks people, that not only are, adult foxes, what the hunts say is they accidentally kill them. And of course, it's very difficult to prove that they've done it accidentally or deliberately. And that's how they get away with it. But when it comes to what they call cubbing, or autumn hunting, as they now also call it, they actually do this to train the new hounds. Because every year, when a dog gets to about 6 years old, they decide it's not running fast enough anymore. Maybe hasn't got the temperament for killing foxes anymore. So they literally will shoot the dogs. And they shoot thousands of these innocent dogs that are in the prime of their life, and literally take them back the back of the shed and put a bullet in their heads and then incinerate them. And they're killing thousands of dogs like this every year. And so they then breed all of these young hounds, and they have to teach them how to chase and kill foxes because it's not in their nature to do it. And so this is why fox cub hunting comes into it. So every autumn, they take them into a copse, a woods, wherever, and they surround it, and they know there's some foxes there. There's a female with her young, and they flush it out, and that's how they train the young hounds to kill the cubs. And thousands of fox cubs are killed in this way. And of course, there's no way that could be possibly interpreted as accidental. That is a very, very deliberate act.
And a horrible one. Now, Eduardo, I want to ask you about trophy hunting. As you know, there's a huge trophy hunting industry supported by some of the world's wealthiest and most powerful people. Your books go into great detail about how they operate and what they do to spread misinformation. Can you tell us briefly, what are some of the biggest lies that these people are spreading to justify what they do?
Gosh, I mean, it's almost hard where to start with that. But let me just sort of paint a picture to begin with. So there's a number of trophy hunting organizations. One of them, Safari Club International, arguably the largest. It's spent over the last decade about $140 million on lobbying. And it's on lobbying to protect hunters' rights, protect the freedom to hunt whatever they choose. This is their language. And of course, they get that money from very wealthy people who like to go trophy hunting. People like Steve Chancellor, for example, who's a major donor to Donald Trump. In fact, if you look, there's a book here, which I've got beside me. It's the Safari Club International Record Book. And it has basically, all of the biggest animals that have been shot by trophy hunters, lions and elephants and so on. So Steve Chancellor's name appears repeatedly in that book because he has shot some of the, in fact, for a while, he had the world record in shooting the largest lion ever known to man. And so there's people like that. You have the NRA puts a lot of money into Safari Club International because they see this as a fight of theirs as well. They have their own trophy hunting campaign. So this is very much an orchestrated gun lobby campaign. They get a lot of money from the gun manufacturers and bullet manufacturers. They also get money from the oil industry. And in fact, a lot of the, for the biggest trophy hunters are actually senior executives in the oil industry. And they have partly because they kind of all come from Texas, or a lot of them do, but also there's a shared political objective. On the one hand, you've got the oil and gas industry that want protections over wilderness areas lifted and relaxed so that they can go in there and extract oil and gas. And the trophy hunting industry wants the same to happen in those exact same areas so that trophy hunters could go in and shoot the endangered animals that are in there. So they get the money from these different groups, and they put some of the money, obviously, well, they put a lot of money actually into the American political system. So Safari Club International's PAC, its Political Action Committee, it funnels huge amounts of money into the campaign coffers of senior American politicians at election time. So, in recent years, we've seen people like Mitch McConnell, who was the US Senate Majority Leader, John Boehner, who was the US House of Representatives Speaker, Sonny Perdue, who was the US Secretary of State for Agriculture, which was the department responsible for the hunting policy. It was putting money into the campaign coffers of Ryan Zinke when he was the Interior Secretary. So when he ran for Congress, SCI, Safari Club International, put a lot of money into his campaign. Of course, he was then responsible for the department that gave import permits to trophy hunters. So that's where a lot of the money goes. But it also goes into, as you say, disinformation campaigns, and they're quite mind-blowing sometimes in their boldness. So, for example, they had this big campaign. They called it Fighting for Lions, and they ran it in partnership with an organization called Conservation Force. Now, at first, you think Conservation Force, that's a conservation organization fighting for lions. They're fighting, to protect lions. No, Conservation Force was actually set up by the president of Safari Club International, and it's a lobbying and litigation organization. It sues governments and countries and companies, indeed, that won't allow trophies on either their planes or in through their borders. So when the state of New Jersey said it wasn't going to allow hunting trophies through its airports or seaports, Conservation Force took them to court. When Delta Airlines said it wasn't going to carry trophies of endangered animals, Conservation Force took them to court. Basically, every single import trophy or import permits of an endangered species has been acquired as a result of Conservation Force's intervention. So Conservation Force and Safari Club International ran this $2 million Fighting for Lions campaign. It wasn't to fight for lions, to protect lions. It was to fight the attempts by African governments, by conservation groups, to get lions listed as endangered. Because if they were officially listed as endangered by the US Fish and Wildlife Service, by CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, by the IUCN Red List, so the World Conservation Union, then it'd be a lot harder to hunt them legally and bring back those trophies back into the country. So that was Fighting for Lions. But they had an even more brazen one, in my view at least, and it was directed specifically at British government ministers and members of parliament. It was called Let Africa Live. And they subcontracted this out to another phony conservation organization called the Inclusive Conservation Group, which was started by the president of another safari hunting group called the Shikar Safari Club International. And the chap who runs it, John Thodos, a prominent trophy hunter. Anyway, so the Inclusive Conservation Group, it created this Let Africa Live organization on social media, which pretended to be an organization of ordinary Africans who supported trophy hunting and who desperately didn't want Americans and Brits to stop trophy hunting because it was so important for them. And of course, it turned out that this was a complete lie. And the whole thing was orchestrated by a single right-wing political consultant out in Arizona. He wasn't African, he was a white American, and he was involved, in fact, in a lot of other fake news campaigns and they all actually got shut down by Facebook and Twitter. They had all of their platforms removed. So, I mean, this is what they do. They create these phony, and they create this narrative that, on the one hand, trophy hunting is great because it's super for conservation. And also, it's really good for tackling poverty in rural areas. And of course, this is complete baloney. I mean, and this gets us into a whole new area, but I'll try and give you just a summary. So let's take lions. Now, we know about the impact of trophy hunting on lions because it's been researched a lot. Partly that was actually, Cecil the lion who was shot with an arrow by that American trophy hunter, Walter Palmer. He was actually part of a study group by Oxford University. They were studying the impact of trophy hunting on lions. 2/3 of the study lions were shot by trophy hunters, by the way, even though they had great big radio collars on them that were you could see for miles. Trophy hunters didn't care. They shot them all. Anyway, so that we know a lot about the impact of trophy hunting on lions. Now, if trophy hunting was so good for conservation, and if trophy hunters like to shoot lions so much, then you would imagine that lion populations would have done really, really well. Well, the current population of lions is no more than about 20,000. Some people say 15,000, even 10,000. But let's take 20,000 as our conservative estimate. 50 years ago, the population of wild lions was 200,000. So in a very short period of time, the lion population has absolutely collapsed whilst we've been shooting them. And we know this because there's a lot of studies that when you shoot one lion, actually there has this huge ripple effect, because it means that lionesses, coalition partners, cubs, they all get killed as well. And there's a number of reasons for that: infanticide and animals coming in to take over the pride and so on. So it has this huge tsunami effect. It's a bullet that has the effect of a nuclear bomb. And we know because there have been periods of time in some countries where they've stopped trophy hunting because of the rapid declines in lion populations. So done this in Zimbabwe, they did this in Zambia. And when the scientists went back, they thought, oh my goodness, there's a load more lions here now. They're all recovering really well. They're bouncing back. And of course, they start trophy hunting again and the numbers plummet. And we see this again and again and again. And the fact is, you said right at the beginning, yes, trophy hunters are shooting an animal every 3 minutes. And this is one of the things that we need to get our heads around, is the scale of this industry, because we only see it occasionally because some idiot posts something on social media and everyone goes crazy about it, and understandably so. But these guys are shooting day in, day out. They're shooting huge numbers of animals, and they're encouraged to do so. They're encouraged to do that so by the trophy hunting industry. So, for example, Safari Club International, again, it has dozens and dozens of awards that it gives to hunters who shoot a lot of animals. So, for example, there's one that's called the Hunting Achievement Award, and it's on different kind of levels. It's a bit like an arcade or computer game, where you play a game on your smartphone, and you kind of go, you have to shoot 10 aliens to get onto level 2, 20 aliens to get onto level 3, etc. It's the same thing with a lot of these awards. So the Hunting Achievement Award has all of these different levels, goes from bronze, copper, silver, gold, and diamond. So to win this prize that's copper level, you have to shoot animals from at least 10 different species. To win it at bronze, you have to shoot animals from 30 different species. Silver, it's 50. Gold, it's 100. But to win the diamond prize, and let me remind you, hundreds and hundreds of trophy hunters have been awarded this prize. To win the diamond prize, you have to have shot animals from at least 125 different species. And they've all got to be big animals as well. They've got to be animals that are worthy of getting into the record book. They can't be puny little things. So as well as removing huge numbers of animals from already declining populations, you've also got this genetic effect. It's the reverse of natural selection. It's artificial selection. You're killing the best, the biggest, the strongest animals, and you're removing those genes from the gene pool. And we're seeing this with lions. Lions have lost 15% of their gene pool over the last century. Their heads and their bodies are smaller. Even the Safari Club International Record Book shows this. In fact, the Safari Club International Record Book even shows that elephants' tusks are getting smaller. Again, because they're shooting the big tuskers, the animals that are most impressive. And in fact, they actually had to lower the bar in the record book because trophy hunters were complaining they couldn't find big elephants anymore. So before, you had to shoot an animal, or an elephant, whose tusks weighed at least 100 pounds when you weigh them together. But there were fewer and fewer of them. So they thought, okay, well, we'll lower the bar. So now the bar is 90 pounds. But even so, they're finding it harder and harder to do that. Now, the problem, of course, is when you start depleting animal species, which are already under threat, of their best genes, then when there's rapid environmental change, where are these external threats, they're less able to adapt and to survive. So lions are now more prone to diseases. Elephants are being more prone to drought. There's a really practical example here. So those tusks, they need them obviously to ward them, predators away, to find food, but also to find water under dry riverbeds. And of course, droughts are getting more frequent. They're getting fiercer. They're getting more prolonged. This is a factor of climate change. So elephants are becoming increasingly prone to drought. They're dying because of drought because they don't have the long tusks anymore to find the scarce water under dry riverbeds. So you've got this vortex effect, and elephant populations are crashing as well. So this is happening right across the animal kingdom, and yet it remains legal to shoot black rhinos, even though they're classed as critically endangered. There's only 3,142 black rhinos left on Earth. You can still shoot them if you're a trophy hunter. You can't shoot them if you're a poacher, but what's the difference? You're doing exactly the same thing. Ditto with a cheetah. There's only, 6,700 cheetahs? You can still shoot them. And of course, the wildlife traffickers, the poachers, they're using this loophole in the law. So CITES, the Conventional International Trade in Endangered Species, says you can't shoot a rhino or a cheetah to, sell its bones or to use its horn to make Chinese medicines or whatever. However, you can shoot that animal if you're a trophy hunter. Well, of course, the wildlife smugglers, they thought, well, this is great. And they literally were putting prostitutes and peasants from Thailand, from Vietnam, onto a plane, giving them $500, $800 to pretend to be a trophy hunter. They didn't even know how to hold a rifle. They'd go out on these safaris. They'd have to get the professional hunter, because they have to have a guide with them. They'd have to get the professional hunter to actually shoot the animal. Then they would, pose next to it as if they're a trophy hunter, sign the thing that says they're a trophy hunter. And of course, that rhino horn goes back into the black market, into Southeast Asia. And rhino horns worth hundreds of millions of dollars were trafficked illegally, but legally, thanks to this trophy hunting loophole.
Well, Eduardo, your book, Undercover Trophy Hunter, is absolutely fascinating because you actually befriended 20 top trophy hunters while you were masquerading as a trophy hunter. Who are these people and what did you learn from them?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We have an image of trophy hunters, and they're very rich, they're very powerful, elite businessmen. A lot of them are, but one of the things that's happened recently is it's been an expanding market. It's become a bit of a mass market, particularly with things like lions. So if you go out into the bush in Tanzania or Zimbabwe to hunt a wild lion, you're going to spend 2-3 weeks out there, and you're spending $50,000, $80,000, $100,000. It's a lot of money. Only a few people can afford that. I mean, actually, some rich trophy hunters do this 2-3 times a year. But now you've got the canned hunting industry. So this is where you're actually breeding lions in cages, and then you get to shoot them in an enclosure. So you don't need to go and spend, 2 weeks out in the bush. You got it right there. It's right in front of you. It's not a sport really at all. It's not a hunt. It's just shooting a fish in a barrel. And these are tame animals. So one of the British trophy hunters, he's not actually in this book, but I wrote about him in a newspaper article. A British trophy hunter who shot one of these lions. And he was boasting about how he shot it from 8 yards. Well, of course he did. The animal thought, he's got no instinct about, this being a threat. He thought probably this guy was coming to feed it because he was used to humans coming to feed it. So this animal was just tame. It's like shooting somebody's pet cat next door. If you or I shot a cat with a bow, or a crossbow, we'd be dragged through the streets and thrown in jail, and rightly so. But this is basically what's happening now. And it's made it, you can now buy a canned lion to shoot for $3,000 in some cases. So, I mean, the cost is, and there's another way they subsidize this. So the deal that you do is you shoot this animal, and sometimes it's a lioness, and they're the cheapest. And you get to keep the skin and the head, the skull, because that's actually all the taxidermist needs in order to make your mount, to make your stuffed animal to put in your lounge or put on your wall. The skeleton is then sold to Asian dealers, who then turn it into lion wine or lion cake. So they'll steep the skeleton of this lion into alcohol, or sometimes they'll crush it up and then maybe add some, turtle, but anyway, some other bits of bone, and then make it into cake, and then bottle. And they did this partly because there's a very popular drink for very wealthy elites in China called tiger wine. It's the bones of tigers in wine, all the rest of it. It's crazy. You can sell it for about $500 one of these bottles. But there's such demand amongst the Chinese elite, they're running out of tigers, so the tigers are all disappearing. So they're actually using lion bones as substitutes because they're very, very similar. In fact, tiger cub and a lion cub when they're born are almost indistinguishable. So genetically very similar. And of course, you can breed tigers and lions, you get ligers. And so there's this massive industry where, there's about 6,000 lions at the moment in cages waiting for a trophy hunter to shoot them. They breed about 6,000 cubs a year. So they managed essentially to subsidize the cost of the trophy hunt through this pretty wicked trade, for these drinks and so-called medicinal products that go into the traditional Chinese market. But, you see a lot of this kind of thing with trophy hunting is providing cover for a lot of illegal wildlife trafficking to go on. If you look at the CITES data, there's a whole lot of bears that, if you look at it at face value, that have been shot as trophies, and that's how they're categorized in the database. And then the trophies, you actually see the details and say gallbladders. What trophy hunter is going to shoot a bear for its gallbladder? Well, of course, they're not. They're Chinese hunters calling themselves trophy hunters, using this loophole. And of course, they're using those galls because they want the bile from them to make these traditional Chinese medicines, all sorts of things. Walrus penises, even polar bear gallbladders as well. Polar bears, we know that they're highly endangered. And we know about this because climate change. It's one of the reasons we're getting the world community to try and tackle this, because of the threat to climate, to the bears that live around the North Pole. And yet you can go to Canada and shoot a polar bear for fun and for its skin. This is absolute insanity. We're in the age of mass extinction, and these animals, they face so many threats, some of which are really quite difficult to grapple with. Habitat loss and change because of climate change, or the expansion of populations, and so encroachment into habitats and needing to grow food and so on. And those are tricky issues to deal with. But trophy hunting is completely unnecessary. It's an additional pressure, an additional problem that we're creating of no need. We don't need to trophy hunt. We're not doing this. We're not killing these animals because we need to eat them. We're not killing these animals because we need their skin, or we need their bones, or we need their oil for fuel or shelter or whatever it is. We're not. We're doing it for fun, for entertainment, for pleasure, which is really troubling from a psychosocial point of view, which is another issue, really. But just from the point of view of conservation, it's insanity. It is the very definition of insanity. We know we've got a massive problem, and we are knowingly making it worse, doing something that is absolutely not necessary by any stretch of the imagination, other than to meet somebody's distorted and sick sense of ego. That's the problem.
It sure is. Eduardo, I find it amazing that in just 1 year after establishing your organization, the Queen announced in her 2019 and 2021 speeches from the throne that the government would be introducing legislation to ban imports from trophy hunting. But in the recent speech from the throne given by Prince Charles, there was no mention of this. What's going on?
It's quite interesting. A few weeks ago, actually, there was some politicians who were quietly briefing journalists that the ban on trophies was going to be quietly dropped. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but actually we published an opinion poll at around about the same time, which showed that 92% of the Conservative Party's own voters want this ban to be implemented as soon as possible, immediately. Only 1% disagreed. And this really shows the breadth of support on this. This is one of those rare political issues which is kind of a no-brainer. It doesn't cost money to implement. Usually that's the first hurdle any new policy initiative has to overcome. How much is it going to cost for the government to implement it, or the taxpayer to fund it? Well, nothing in this case. In fact, if anything, it's going to save money, because you no longer have civil servants and officials having to, scrutinize and fill out these permits that trophy hunters submit when they want to import something. So that was the first thing. Secondly, what does the media think about it? Well, the media is totally on board, right across the board. I mean, I've lost count now of the number of front page lead stories we've had on this story, and we've done a lot. I mean, obviously that's because of our work. We've done a lot of investigations, a lot of work, a lot of research, and made it an issue to bring it to the public's attention, because probably that's the issue's biggest enemy: the fact that it is something that people don't know about. Only now, when there was the big outrage around Cecil being shot, it was mostly because people thought, hang on a second, people are still shooting lions for trophy. Didn't this die out 100 years ago with the empire, the colonies, and all the rest of it? And they're kind of really shocked that a beautiful and increasingly threatened animal like the lion is being killed by people just for the hell of it, and so they can boast about it. And so we've obviously been working very hard to say, no, this is happening every day. And it's, hundreds of species. The Safari Club International Record Book has got 899 different categories of species and subspecies that you can enter your record into, which is mind-blowing. You can go, in fact, there's a website called bookyourhunts.com. It's kind of like the Amazon of trophy hunters. You can literally click and kill. You go on there, you put in your search term, like you would on Amazon, you put in the name of a book. Here, you put in the name of an animal. I want to shoot a squirrel. I want to shoot a kangaroo, a giraffe, a camel, a wallaby, an elephant, a lion, and it's got it there. It's got about 400 different species on offer at any one time. It's an absolutely extraordinary, massive industry. But going back to what's happening in Britain, yeah, we managed to create this massive wave of support. And obviously, there's been some turmoil in British politics in the last couple of years. Obviously, there was Brexit, the exit of Britain from the European Union. Basically, we're having to tear up all sorts of laws and implement new ones. So there's this huge pressure on the government's legislative agenda. Then, of course, there's been COVID, the pandemic, and a lot of the resources and staff of different government departments have been diverted from what they were working on previously to focusing on this emergency. And that's understandable. I mean, this is a global pandemic, like something we haven't seen in at least a century. And then you've got other domestic political things that are going on. So there's been a lot of stories here in Britain in the press about how during the pandemic, whilst a lot of the public was isolating and there are all these regulations about not mixing and socializing and so on, that seemingly there were parties going on at Number 10, which is both the official office and residence of the Prime Minister. And in fact, the police have just announced today they've completed their investigation. They've issued 126 fines for parties going on at Number 10, which is quite extraordinary. So, I mean, that has really captured editors' attention in the media and so on. And of course, what happens is that other things kind of fall off the list a little bit, don't they? They kind of go on the back burner. Now, with trophy hunting, yes, there was the rumors going around it was going to be dropped. We managed to get it back on the agenda. It wasn't mentioned in the verbal part of the Queen's speech that was delivered by Prince Charles, but it was actually included in the written supplemental documentation, albeit, kind of almost tucked away as an afterthought. But I mean, clearly what's happening, I think, is that the government is looking at its political situation. It's going down in the polls, approval ratings for the Prime Minister going down. It's trying to think what is going to, get us riding high again. What's going to win us the next election? It's got a couple of difficult by-elections coming up, and it's just lost a couple as well. And I think there's a sense of, we've got to find those vote-winning policies, and maybe this isn't a priority. Well, actually, that's the wrong way of thinking about it, because this is a really big issue for the public in Britain. What was really interesting is another part of the opinion poll that hasn't really been talked about quite as much is we asked Conservative voters, would they actually think about changing their vote if the government broke their manifesto pledge, and it wasn't the election manifesto, to deliver this ban? The results were quite extraordinary. Even I was surprised. So 1 in 3 people who say that they vote Conservative said, yeah, they probably will actually desert the party and vote for somebody else, because this is such an important issue for them. And interestingly, so if you like, that's the sort of the stick to beat the government with. But there's a carrot there as well, because the opposition parties, their voters were asked a similar question. They were asked, well, would you actually think about voting Conservative instead if the Conservative government went ahead and delivered this policy that's been promoting? And roughly the same proportion, about 29-30% of Labour and Liberal Democrat voters said, yeah, do you know what? I'll think about voting Conservative if they do this. So I think the government has got to be reminded that this is an issue that is really important to voters. You don't get issues very often where 90% plus of people say, yeah, we think this is really important and we want the government to legislate now. And indeed, it's not an issue where you've got, on the one hand, you've got, if you like, sort of more liberal tabloid newspapers, but also kind of conservative broadsheet newspapers like the Times that are absolutely singing from the same hymn sheet on this. You've got people from every single political party who are supporting this. We've done a lot of actions in Parliament, published letters in the Times. It's been unprecedented when you have motions in Parliament signed by every single members of parliament from every single political party. We have letters in the Times signed by members of parliament from every single party.
Well, that doesn't surprise me because the love of animals crosses all socioeconomic levels and all political views. I want to ask you about Cecil. Cecil was one of the rarest and most beautiful black-maned lions in the world. He was lured out of a protected area in Zimbabwe and brutally murdered on July 2nd, 2015, with a bow and arrow by Walter Palmer, an American dentist. It took the lion 12 hours to die an agonizing death. I understand you'll be launching a report to coincide with the anniversary of Cecil's murder, which will name the top 50 current trophy hunters. And you'll be telling us how many animals each of them have single-handedly shot. Is that right?
Yeah, that is something that we're working on, indeed. And there's a number of trophy hunters who get these prizes that I was telling you about, and so that Safari Club International offers. So, like the Hunting Achievement Award, where they'll have shot at least 125 animals, or from 125 different species. But they will have shot, gotten a lot of other awards as well. So, using Safari Club International records, we're able to give a number of animals that those people have shot. But it's also important to remember, actually, that not all trophy hunters actually put their names into the hat for these awards, and they're just quite happy to shoot animals, and they don't. That's reward enough for them. I mean, there's people, for example, like Tony Sanchez Areno. He's a Spanish trophy hunter. He's still going. Now, he's shot 1,300 elephants, 340 lions. I think it's 127 leopards, 167 rhinos, 2,000 buffaloes, etc., etc., etc. Marcel Gomez Sequeira, another Spanish trophy hunter, he's shot thousands of animals. Ron Thompson has single-handedly shot 5,000 elephants and about 1,000 other animals. So, the numbers of animals single-handedly these people are taking is colossal. And in some cases, they don't even put their names into the hat for a prize. They think they've what they've done is enough of a reward. But certainly, yes, that it is possible if you're able to acquire Safari Club International data to see, who has been winning the most prizes, what have they been winning them for, what do you need to do in order to win those prizes, and in that way you can put together a list of people who, have shot literally hundreds, if not more, of animals just for entertainment.
Now, you're also working on a book called Making a Killing, which is about the companies that make a fortune from those who like to kill animals for fun. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a very profitable business. And, one of the things I think very interesting that the trophy hunting industry says is that one of the reasons we shouldn't get rid of it is because it brings so much money to poor communities. That's not true. It brings a lot of money into the pockets of the rich companies and their company owners who are white. Some of them are American. Some of them are, descendants of settlers, white settlers in South Africa. Those people are making a killing, literally, but local people are not. I mean, the number of jobs that are created for these people is derisory. You maybe have a cook, a cleaner, a skinner, a tracker, but that's it. And they're working some of the year because it's a seasonal thing. There's a hunting season, so the rest of the year they're out of work. They may be paid $500 for a year's work. Whereas some of these people who run the companies, they're pocketing, seven-figure sums. And for them, it is a big business. They're making the money, but poor people aren't. That one will come out this year. I don't yet have a timeline for that, but I mean, certainly the report on the top trophy hunters, that will be coming out around the time of Cecil, the anniversary of the shooting of Cecil. The book Making a Killing is still in the works, and partly because we've got quite a lot of research going on at the moment, and we're just sort of having to juggle. Because we're a very, very, very small organization, and we're, against, Safari Club International spends around $14 million a year on average on lobbying, and this is a bit of a David and Goliath thing. The odds are stacked against us, but public opinion is with us, and that's really important. One of the things that actually has shocked me when I've researched the trophy hunting industry is where some of the money has come from. One of the things they do every year is have their big convention in the US, and they have these auctions where they have companies that donate an animal to them so that they can then auction a hunt of that animal off, and that money goes into their lobbying pot. And I've actually got here a conference catalogue. So all the different animals that you can bid for on auction. It's got polar bears in here. It's got elephants. It's got leopards. It's got everything, all sorts of. And you know, you're going to get a chance. You can even bid for a chance to go on a 1-to-1 trophy hunt with Donald Trump Jr.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, this raises a lot of money for the industry. Yeah, we don't have that kind of income, but we're doing our best.
Now, as you know, Eduardo, we had Lynn, Santer, and James Ganiere on our show to promote their monumentally important film, Land of the Free in the Shadows. That was a short film, and now they're producing a full-length feature film. Tell us how you've been involved in assisting them with that movie.
So we've done some filming in London, and we were able to interview a lot of members of Parliament who, from different parties, who are all very supportive of a ban. And it really underlines the cross-party, the non-partisan nature of this issue, and the very, great strength of feeling that there is. And I remember, we did an event and where they were filming, and we had a number of NGOs, a number of different conservation and animal welfare organizations all came out. In a very cold day it was, actually, but everyone came out because it was something that they really wanted to show their support for. And a lot of members of Parliament came out, and even Lords from the House of Lords. And I've been helping them gain an insight into the work of organizations like Safari Club International, where they get their money from, where that money goes, how they've been able to even, get inside organizations like the World Conservation Union. This is a body that's supposed to help provide guidelines to governments on the parlous state of many endangered species and what they should be doing to protect them. And you have extraordinary situations where, for example, their lion experts group, it's called the IUCN Lion Working Group. Amongst its members is a guy called John J. Jackson III. Now, John J. Jackson III was president of Safari Club International, and he founded Conservation Force, this fake group, if you like, that does all the lobbying and litigation work on behalf of trophy hunting interest groups. He's one of the world's leading lion hunters, one of the world's leading elephant hunters as well. He's actually said that elephant hunting is the most intimate thing a man can experience, and that he's never felt more fulfilled than when he goes elephant hunting. And he's got an extraordinary collection of trophies in his room. He's got polar bears and lions and leopards and elephants and everything. And he's sort of written about how he can still remember, for example, one time when he shot a lion, and remembering the lion's head exploding in a cloud of smoke as the bullet hit it. And he writes these things, and this is actually out there in the public. I mean, if you know where to find it, it's not secret. And yet he's allowed to sit on the lion experts group. And that's why, of course, IUCN was one of the reasons that people speculate that IUCN hasn't declared the lion as an endangered species, even though it suffered such a precipitous collapse in populations, which is almost unprecedented with any other species. And even groups like Safari Club International and Dallas Safari Club, they are actually allowed to be members of the IUCN. So, of course, they're right in the heart of the system. They have official status within CITES, the International Wildlife Trade Body as well. So, they've really got their fingers into the system, and it's very visible on Capitol Hill. So they created the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. And, a huge proportion of members of the House of Representatives are in there, huge proportion of senators, but even US state governors, a huge number of them are members of this. And of course, this is the official body representing the hunting industry's viewpoint on Capitol Hill. And that's one of the reasons why I think, this barbarity has been able to succeed and survive when, gradually society has evolved and we have developed values and consider ourselves to be modern and advanced and civilized and so on. And yet, this goes on. We've banned all sorts of things like bear baiting and cockfighting and dog fighting and other really gruesome animal sports that used to happen, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. We've realized they're wrong. They're morally wrong. And we've consigned them to the dustbin of history, rightly so. Somehow, trophy hunting has slipped through the gap.
Do you have faith that someday, in the foreseeable future, we'll be living in a world where the killing of endangered animals for pleasure will be outlawed everywhere in the world?
I do, and there will probably still be exceptions and pockets where it goes on, as it does indeed with dogfighting still today, even though it is largely illegal around the world. But I think, let's say 50 years' time, we will look back as a society and think, my goodness, how did we allow this to go on for so long?
How can we all help and support you?
The very, very, very first thing you got to do is contact your elected representative. And the other thing is, well, obviously, I would say support us, support the campaign to ban trophy hunting, because we are the only organization that's focused on this issue and that we're working internationally and we're winning. We've managed to get what is one of the most conservative parties in the world to adopt this as a policy and to put it in their election manifesto and to get the Queen to read it out as a commitment in front of Parliament, in front of the TV screens, and get every single party in Britain signed up to this, from right to left, everyone in the middle. So and now the politicians in Belgium, inspired by what we've been doing, they've just had a resolution in their parliament. They voted unanimously to adopt a resolution to ban trophy imports into their country. They're now talking about this in Germany as well. Germany, another country that has a strong hunting culture, if you like the US. But you see, this is the fact. Wherever you look around the world, the proportions of people who are against trophy hunting, who want this to end, are about the same. There was a poll in the States about elephant trophy imports some years ago, showed 85-90% of people agree it should be stopped. So the public are already on our side, or we, the public, if you like, we are in the mainstream. So use that, get in touch with your politicians, but also support us in our work in investigating this barbarity, rooting out the corruption and the cruelty that it's involved, and bringing this barbaric, insane industry to a well-deserved end.
Amen. I want to tell our viewers that you can follow Eduardo's pursuits and find out everything that's going on by going to his website, edgoncalves.wordpress.com. And the website for the campaign to ban trophy hunting is bantrophyhunting.org. And if you share our passion for this important cause, please consider making a donation to the campaign to ban trophy hunting. Well, Eduardo, I want to thank you and commend you with all my heart for everything you've been doing for the animals. And thank you so much for appearing on our show.
Harvey, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much for speaking and giving me this opportunity really to talk about the issue, get people to know about it a bit more, and hopefully feel inspired and empowered to help do something about it and help save these beautiful, amazing creatures, which really are, so many of them, on the brink of extinction.
Well, if anyone can make this happen, I know it's you. Our guest has been conservationist, activist, author, and humanitarian extraordinaire, Eduardo Goncalves. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.